The men wore no colours I recognised, which told me everything I needed to know about how much trouble we were in, and one of them already had a gloved hand closing around a small, furious, snapping shape that was trying its very best to bite through leather. I did not think. I threw the only weapon I had, a fistful of ground nettle powder meant for easing swollen joints, useless against steel. Apparently quite effective against a man's unprotected eyes. He screamed. The pup wriggled free and bolted for me instead of away, which was, in hindsight, exactly the wrong direction for either of us to be running. Somewhere behind me, a sound came out of the trees that did not belong to any man I had ever heard, and I understood, in the half-second before everything happened at once, that I was about to find out exactly how much of the king's reputation had been true after all. 3 days before any of that, I found a wolf pup shivering under a fallen log at the edge of Hollowmere Wood, and spent the whole of a very long day trying to discover whose child he was. My name is Orla, and I have gathered herbs at the edge of Hollowmere Wood since I was old enough to tell Nettle from Foxglove, which in a village with one healer and a great many aching backs made me considerably more useful than my station would otherwise suggest. I had no house name worth mentioning, no dowry, no particular prospects beyond the quiet. Useful life of a woman who knew which roots eased a fever and which ones stopped a heart. I liked that life. It asked very little of me and gave, in return, exactly what I put into it. I was 23 the spring I found the pup. Hollowmere sat at the far edge of Alpha country, close enough to the wilder borders that we saw more wolves passing through than most villages ever did, and far enough from the king's own keep that most of us had never laid eyes on him at all. King Magnus ruled from Ironmoor, 3 days' ride north, and what we knew of him we knew from traders and rumour, that he was the strongest alpha in 4 territories, that his temper had ended more than one border dispute before it started, and that no sane person crossed him twice. We knew less about the boy, though what little reached us was strange enough to remember. A son, born the same winter his mother died, raised, the traders said, behind more guards than the treasury itself. No public presentations, no naming day feast the way most alpha heirs got, loud and open to the whole territory. Just a closed household, and a king who was said to have gone considerably harder and colder in the years since his wife's death than he had been before it. I had filed the rumour away the way I filed most gossip that had nothing to do with my own small corner of the world, and thought no more of it, until the morning I found a pup shivering under a log, with no mother anywhere in sight. I found the pup curled beneath a fallen log, no bigger than a barn cat, shivering, one paw tucked awkwardly against his chest in a way that suggested a fall, rather than an injury from teeth. He growled at me for exactly as long as it took him to decide I was not a threat, and then he simply attached himself to my ankle and refused to be parted from it, which settled the matter of what I intended to do with the rest of my day. I spent the morning knocking on every door in Hollowmere that kept livestock near the wood, in case some travelling pack had lost a straggler. I spent the afternoon at the mill, where old Ansel swore he'd seen wolf folk camped near the North Bridge a fortnight back, a lead that came to nothing but 3 wasted hours and a blister. By dusk, I had exhausted every possibility I could think of, and had, somewhere in the course of the day, stopped thinking of the pup as a problem to solve, and started thinking of him as a small, stubborn houseguest who had decided, entirely without consulting me, that my basket was an acceptable place to nap. I was sitting on my own doorstep, resigned to keeping him at least for the night, when the ground began to shake. Not literally, I want to be precise about that, because I have told this story enough times now that people expect thunder. It was the sound of a great many boots moving with a great deal of purpose, and then the sound of my neighbours going very quiet, the particular quiet of people who recognise danger and have decided their best option is stillness. He came out of the tree line like the forest itself had simply rearranged to produce him, tall in the way that made doorways look smaller, dressed in dark, practical fur, rather than any crown I would have recognized, and wearing an expression I can only describe as a man holding himself together through the specific violence of his own restraint. The pup went off like a loosed arrow. He hit King Magnus somewhere around the knee, an undignified full-body collision that would have staggered a smaller man, and the King of Ironmoor, the alpha my neighbours had gone the colour of old linen, simply watching approach, dropped to both knees in the dirt of my dooryard, and gathered the pup up against his chest with both arms, and made a sound I would not have believed a man his size capable of making, something raw and wrecked and entirely unroyal. "Fen," he said into the pup's fur, over and over, like it was the only word he had left. "Fen. Fen." I looked around at my neighbours, every single one of them frozen mid-motion, and understood, finally, why everyone in Hollowmere had gone so quiet. I had spent the whole day looking for a lost dog. I had apparently been minding the Alpha King's son. He did not stand immediately. He stayed there in the dirt for a long moment with his son's face buried against his neck, and when he finally looked up at me, whatever had been raw and wrecked in his face a moment before had already begun folding itself back into something colder, more composed. A king reassembling himself in real time, in front of an audience he had not chosen. You found him. He found me, more accurately. I spent the day trying to find you. You could have sent word to the keep. A rider. Anything. Instead, you kept him for an entire day among strangers, with no notion who he belonged to, no notion what. He stopped himself, visibly, the words costing him something to hold back. I had no way of knowing he belonged to anyone important, Your Grace. He looked like a lost pup. I treated him like one. He is the heir to Ironmoor. He was, this morning, a frightened animal with a hurt paw and no supper. I'm afraid I didn't have time to check his credentials before I fed him. Someone behind him made a sound that might have been a cough, and was very obviously a laugh badly disguised. Magnus did not turn to look, though a muscle in his jaw suggested he very much wanted to. Fen, for his part, showed no interest whatsoever in returning to whatever dignified transition his father had planned. He had both fists knotted in Magnus's collar, and gave every indication of intending to stay there through sheer stubbornness alone, a trait I suspected he had not learned from strangers. "He's not going to let go easily," I offered, since no one else seemed inclined to address the small, immovable problem currently attached to the king's throat. He rarely does, these days. Something moved behind Magnus's eyes, quick and guarded. Garrick, see that the woman is compensated for her trouble, and that Hollowmere understands the debt this pack owes it. I don't want payment. Everyone wants payment. I wanted my afternoon back, mostly, and possibly to know whether that mill story about wolf folk at the North Bridge has any truth to it, because I wasted 3 good hours chasing it. I looked at Fen, who had gone very quiet, watching me with the same unblinking attention he had given me all afternoon. And I suppose I'd like to know he's all right. Properly, not from a rider a week from now. Magnus studied me for a long moment, the way you study something you had not accounted for, and are now recalculating around. "Come to Ironmoor tomorrow," he said, "and see for yourself." Garrick fell into step beside me as the party made ready to leave, close enough that only I could hear him. "This isn't the first time," he said low, "just so you're not caught off guard by how the keep reacts tomorrow. It's the 4th time this season the boys slipped his watchers. Each time worse than the last." He glanced back at Magnus, still crouched in my dooryard, still not quite ready to stand with his son wrapped around him. Something's not right about how easily he keeps managing it. I'd be careful, if I were you, about how deep you let yourself get pulled into this. I did not understand, that evening, what he meant by careful. I would understand it considerably better within the week. I went to Ironmoor the next morning, mostly out of stubbornness, and partly because I could not stop thinking about the particular quality of relief on a king's face when his son had barreled into his knees. The keep was exactly as imposing as I expected, and considerably less comfortable, all cold stone and colder formality, and Fen found me before anyone official could. Barreling down a corridor at a speed no nursemaid seemed capable of matching and attaching himself to my leg with the same enthusiasm as the day before. "He's been asking for you since dawn," said a tired-looking nurse, sounding equal parts grateful and faintly scandalized. "Refused breakfast until someone promised him you'd come." Magnus found us in the garden an hour later, Fen asleep in my lap, the way he had apparently decided was now customary, and stood in the doorway for a long moment before he spoke. In a posture I was beginning to recognize as his particular way of working up courage. "Garrick tells me you asked about the wolf folk at the North Bridge," he said. "There was no camp. I had it checked myself, this morning, before you arrived. Then who started the rumour?" "I don't know yet. I intend to find out." He crossed the garden and sat, carefully, a measured distance away, close enough to see his son's face, far enough that I understood the distance was deliberate. "Fen has slipped his watchers 4 times this season, always toward the village, always in daylight, when he's least likely to actually be lost for long. I used to think it was simple mischief. And now? Now I think my son has been searching for something none of us have managed to give him, and I am trying very hard not to examine too closely what that says about the household I've built for him." His jaw tightened. 3 years ago, someone tried to take him from that same garden. My own cousin's man, we later learned, though we never proved Varick's hand in it directly enough to act on. Since then, I have kept him so closely watched, he has apparently decided the watching itself is the thing worth escaping. I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing, and let the garden's quiet do the work silence usually does better than words. Magnus did not reach for me. I did not reach for him. We sat there instead, a measured distance apart, with his sleeping son between us like a small, warm, oblivious chaperone, and I found I did not mind the distance nearly as much as I might have expected to. "You should be careful," he said, eventually, coming here. "Being seen with him. If Varick is watching for weakness, a village herbalist with no house behind her name is exactly the kind of weakness he'd know how to use." "I appreciate the warning, Your Grace. I don't think I'm going to take it." Something that was almost a smile moved across his face, there and gone. "No," he said. "I didn't think you would. I did not know, that afternoon, how right Garrick's warning was going to turn out to be, or how much a boy's habit of running toward the one place that felt safe to him was about to cost all 3 of us. If you want to find out whether a king's fear of losing his son again is stronger than the good, stubborn thing that's already starting to grow in that garden, stay with me. What happens next in Hollowmere is not something any of us saw coming, myself included. I went back to Ironmoor 3 more times that week, each visit a little less formal than the last, each one ending with Fen negotiating, with the shameless confidence of a 6-year-old who has never once been told no by anyone he actually respects. For exactly 1 more story before I was allowed to leave, Magnus started walking me to the gate himself, a task I suspected belonged to someone considerably lower in the household hierarchy, and each time he found some new, thin excuse to make the walk last a few minutes longer than it needed to. "You could simply say you enjoy the company," I told him on the 4th such walk, instead of inventing a fresh reason to inspect the gate hinges every time I leave. The hinges genuinely do need attention. Every single time. Ironmoor is an old keep. Things wear down. He did not quite meet my eyes when he said it, which told me considerably more than the words did. I had started, by then, to notice the particular quality of quiet that settled over the household whenever I arrived. Not suspicion, exactly, but a kind of careful watching, as though everyone from the stable boys to the eldest council members were waiting to see whether I intended to stay long enough to matter. I told myself I did not care what any of them thought. I mostly believed it. Garrick found me a week later, back in Hollowmere, grim in a way that told me before he said a word that the careful I had been warned about had run out. "We found out how he keeps slipping the watch," Garrick said. "Someone's been altering the rotation logs. Small changes. A name moved an hour early. A gate left unmanned for 10 minutes that shouldn't be. Someone with access to the schedules is making certain there's always a gap exactly when Fen decides to run. Varric, we can't prove it. Not yet. But the pattern only started after your first visit. Which means whoever's doing this either wants Fen caught somewhere he shouldn't be, or wants him caught with someone it would be politically useful to blame." Garrick's jaw worked. "I think it's you they're setting up to take the fall for this, one way or another. Either they take him while he's with you, and it looks like negligence on Ironmore's part they can exploit, or they take him and make certain it looks like you helped." Something in me went very still and very clear. The particular stillness of understanding exactly what I was standing in the middle of, and exactly what I intended to do about it regardless. "Then we stop waiting for him to make the next move," I said. "Tell Magnus I'm not going anywhere. If Fen keeps running toward Hollowmere, I'd rather be ready for what's waiting there than pretend staying away keeps anyone safe." Varric found me at the market 3 days later, pleasant in the particular way powerful men are pleasant right before they stop being so. "I understand you've become something of a fixture at Ironmore," he said. "Admirable. A village girl catching a king's eye. Foolish, given how these things tend to end for women without a house behind them. I'd hate to see you caught in the middle of a family matter that has nothing to do with you. I wasn't aware minding a frightened child counted as a family matter, my lord. Everything involving the succession is a family matter." Something moved behind his eyes, brief and cold. "I'd think carefully about how much time you spend near that boy. Ironmore has a way of losing patience with outsiders who overstay a king's momentary gratitude." I told him I understood. I did not tell him that I had already decided, days before, that I intended to keep doing exactly what I had been doing, regardless of what any lord thought was wise. I told Garrick about the conversation that same evening, expecting him to be alarmed. He was not. "Good," he said. "Let him think you're rattled. A man who believes he's already won stops being careful, and Varric has not been careful in weeks. He simply hasn't been caught at it yet." He studied me for a moment. "I've doubled the watch on the north gate without telling him. If he's going to make his move using Fen's habit against him, I'd rather know when it's coming than hope we're lucky. And if you're wrong about the north gate, then I'm wrong, and we adjust." He did not look particularly comforted by his own answer, which did not comfort me either. Fen slipped his watches again 8 days later, on a warm afternoon that should have been perfectly ordinary, and ran, as always, straight for Hollowmere. Except this time, when I found him at the edge of the wood exactly where I always seemed to find him. We were not alone. The men wore no colours I recognised, which told me everything I needed to know about how much trouble we were in, and one of them already had a gloved hand closing around a small, furious snapping shape that was trying its very best to bite through leather. I did not think. I threw the only weapon I had, a fistful of ground nettle powder meant for easing swollen joints, useless against steel. Apparently quite effective against a man's unprotected eyes. He screamed. The pup wriggled free and bolted for me instead of away, which was, in hindsight, exactly the wrong direction for either of us to be running. Somewhere behind me, a sound came out of the trees that did not belong to any man I had ever heard, and I understood, in the half-second before everything happened at once. that I was about to find out exactly how much of the king's reputation had been true after all. Magnus came out of that tree line already shifted, and I understood, watching him move, precisely why no sane person crossed him twice. What followed was fast, and brutal, and mercifully brief, and I spent most of it with Fenn's face buried in my shoulder, and my own body curled around his, as small as I could make it, listening to sounds I have no wish to describe in detail, and would not know how to if I tried. Garrick's men reached the clearing perhaps a minute behind their king, close enough behind that I understood. Later, they must have already been converging on the north gate before the attack even began. Garrick's doubled watch, the one he had not told Varric's people about, doing exactly the job it was meant to do. I heard shouting, and the particular scramble of men realizing an ambush had become a trap of their own. And through all of it, I kept my eyes shut and my arms around Fenn, and did not look up until the noise had changed shape entirely, from violence into something more like cleanup. When it was over, 3 men were restrained in Garrick's custody, and 1 had run, and Magnus stood in the clearing breathing hard, fully shifted back, blood on his hands that was not his own, looking at me and his son with an expression that had nothing composed left in it at all. The man who ran did not get far. Garrick's people caught him before nightfall, and what he told them, once it became clear loyalty to Varric was not worth the price he was being asked to pay for it, was more than enough. Lord Varric had been altering the watch rotations for 2 months, waiting for an opportunity clean enough to use, and had settled, finally, on making it look as though the boy had been taken while in the unsupervised care of a village woman with no standing to defend herself against the accusation. Magnus confronted him in the great hall the next morning, in front of the full household, and I have never in my life seen a man's composure disassemble so completely so fast. "You used my son as bait," Magnus said, "to frame the one person who has done nothing this year but make him feel safe. I have spent 3 years watching you circle this succession like it was owed to you. It was never owed to you, and after today, it is no longer available to you at all." Varric tried, briefly, to argue that no formal proof tied him directly to the men who had ambushed us, that the captured raiders had implicated only intermediaries, that a king acting on suspicion alone set a dangerous precedent for the whole council. It might even have worked, on another day, with a less furious king and a less exhausted room. It did not work on this one. Garrick laid the altered rotation logs on the council table himself, page after page in a hand 3 separate scribes confirmed as Varric's own stewards, and the argument collapsed under the weight of paper rather than passion, which I have since decided is usually the more effective way for these things to end. Fenn, once the healer had checked him over and declared him more furious than hurt, would not be separated from me for the rest of that day, which meant I stayed at Ironmoor considerably longer than I had planned, and meant that half the household had ample opportunity to watch their king fail spectacularly at pretending he did not also want me to stay. He found me that evening in the same garden, Fenn finally, genuinely asleep for once, and knelt in front of me the way he had knelt in my own dooryard 3 weeks before, dirt and all. I have spent 3 years building a household so careful, so guarded, that my own son had to run toward danger to find one honest afternoon, he said. And then a woman with nettle powder and no house behind her name did more to protect him in one moment than every wall I've built in 3 years. I am done being careful in the ways that cost the people I love the most. Stay, not for Fenn's sake, though he will be unbearable if you don't. For mine, that's not really a question, Your Grace. No, he agreed. I find I've gotten considerably better at statements than questions, this year. I kissed him first, there in the garden, with his son asleep between us and the whole absurd, terrifying, wonderful day finally catching up with both of us at once. And it was brief, and warm, and settled something in me, that had been braced since the moment a wolf pup decided my ankle looked like a good place to stay. The fallout was thorough. Varric was stripped of every title and holding he had ever claimed and exiled beyond Ironmoor's borders within the week, and the household spent a long season afterward, tightening every gap he had spent 2 months quietly widening. Garrick was given full authority over the watch rotations going forward, a promotion he has told me, more than once, he would have traded happily to have never needed. 6 months later, Fen has stopped running toward Hollowmere, mostly because he no longer has to. I live at Ironmoor now, in rooms close enough to the nursery that he can reach me without slipping a single watcher, and the household has, with visible reluctance on the part of several old families, gotten used to the sight of their king eating breakfast with a village herbalist and an increasingly opinionated 6-year-old. Fen calls me by a name he invented himself and has refused to explain the origin of, and Magnus tells me, privately, that it sounds suspiciously like the word Fen used to say for his mother before she died birthing him. Though neither of us has ever asked the boy directly, because some things are better left to arrive in their own time. Hollowmere has not entirely gotten used to the change either, though for gentler reasons than Ironmoor's. Old Ansel still tells anyone who will listen that he was the one who first mentioned wolffolk at the North Bridge, and takes an entirely undeserved amount of credit for what came of that rumour, which I have decided not to correct him about, because he is old and it makes him happy, and the truth would only give him something new to grumble about instead. Garrick visits Hollowmere twice a season now, ostensibly on King's business, actually to check the perimeter of my mother's old cottage with the same thoroughness he once reserved for Ironmoor's own walls. I have told him repeatedly that he does not need to. He has told me, just as repeatedly, that he intends to keep doing it anyway, and I have stopped arguing, because I understand, watching him work, that some men show their loyalty in exactly this way, not with words, but with a fence checked twice, that nobody asked them to check even once. Fen's naming day, the one his mother never got to see finished, was held properly for the first time this spring, open to the whole territory, loud and bright, and considerably less guarded than any household gathering Ironmoor had managed in years. He wore the carved wolf pendant Magnus had commissioned for the occasion, and spent most of the ceremony trying to give it to me instead. Apparently under the impression that I would enjoy it more, which I suppose, in his own small way, was Fen's version of choosing me publicly too. The nettle powder recipe has become something of a joke around Ironmoor's kitchen since, half the household convinced I keep a jar of it on my person at all times for exactly this purpose. I have not corrected that impression either. It is, on the whole, a useful thing for a king's household to believe about the woman raising his son. I went looking for a lost pup, and found instead exactly where I was supposed to be all along. I have never once regretted the day I spent searching. I still wonder what would have happened if Varric's man had gotten a better grip before the nettle powder hit, or if Magnus had been 30 seconds slower out of that tree line. I do not like where that thought ends, so I do not finish it. But I wonder about you. Did you suspect Varric before Garrick named him? Or did the reveal catch you as off guard as it caught me? Tell me your theory in the comments. Comment the nettle if you want to hear about the first time Fen tried to teach the entire Ironmoor kitchen staff how to properly chase a chicken. And if you want more nights like this one, a king whose reputation turned out to be armour over something considerably softer. A boy who never stopped running toward the one place that felt safe. And a herbalist who never once regretted getting involved. Stay close. There is more of Ironmoor left to tell. Where are you listening from tonight? I would love to know.